Oh, is this? Okay. Attention. I want to just call this village board, special village board meeting to order. It is 6:35 and has this meeting been publicly noticed?
It has.
All trustees are present except, help me out here, Trustee Bucklish, Trustee McKay. Our first and only agenda item tonight is to hear some not final, but some results from our transportation study that's been going on since last April, so a while, and we have a bunch of public input, and I just want to make it clear, because all the trustees on the board felt that we should make it clear to the public, this is not the final, we're not implementing everything that's being said today, we're just being presented of what the findings are, and if there are some findings that we, as the trustees of the board, the majority of the board, feel that the public are in the best interest of Shorewood's public, we would then continue on with implementation, but have more public sessions on that recommendation. So it wouldn't be, this is not the end where you're not going to have any further input. This is just presenting facts based on some data that they collected. So with that, I'll turn it over to either our ladies.
Two quick things to say. You covered most of what I was going to mention, so thank you for that. The other two things, it is scheduled a village board meeting on Monday that we will be sharing staff's implementation plan for it. So based on tonight's meeting, if there are other things that need to add to that, just so you know, Becky and I will have more in your packet for Monday.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Implementation just means what you're recommending
Correct.
Forward.
Absolutely.
And we will decide as a board, elected board, if we want to do that, and if so, how much public participation.
Yep, and so part of that conversation is to make sure that we're on board knowing where to put our work plan for the year. So it's not going to be confirmed anytime, immediately to that point. But we are looking forward to beginning the conversation of implementation. So tonight's meeting is primarily to have the consultants present their recommendations and to confirm for the board here that the project scope has been met. If for some reason any members of the board or otherwise feel as though something is not covered, this is the opportunity to let them know that we don't have the information we're looking for. So prior to accepting the plan, we'll give them that feedback, and then the goal is to accept the plan in February and then move forward with implementation soon thereafter, at least the conversation of implementation. So with that, I will turn it over to Bobby. Looks like you're ready to go first, and you can start with the parking sections.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. Evening, everybody. We've been here a few different times, so we'll do just like a quick introduction. Bobby Bordenti, urban planner, designer with Walker Consultants.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see most of you again. Welcome to some new faces. I'm Andrew Baglini, working also with Walker out of our Chicago office, and thanks so much for coming.
And I'm Steve Corcoran, with a traffic engineer with Erickson Engineering on the Grace Lake, Illinois.
Yeah, and as far as I'll speak for the whole team, we just want to say thank you to Bart, Rebecca, the village president, the trustees, and especially the community. Their input, it was a tremendous effort trying to get this all together. We could not have done it without the community support and input on a lot of these recommendations and findings. So thank you. What we're going to do now is just going to present the final recommendations. We'll kind of talk through just the flow of the meeting. So what we're going to do is talk about the parking transportation planning goals. Those are basically the fundamental goals that we have set up for the whole report. We're also going to do just a quick overview of the community engagement, all the different workshops, and the input from the survey. And then we're going to break it up into two different sections, which you should be familiar with. We've done this throughout the project process. Parking analysis and then transportation. We're going to do actually Q&A after each of the sections. So parking analysis we'll do after the findings recommendations. We'll open it up to the village board for any clarifying questions. And then we'll transition to Steve, and he's going to discuss transportation, and then we'll end with the final questions and comments on the transportation section.
A question, would you mind, or would you prefer questions from the board as we go, or should we write them down and ask at a certain period of time?
Just for the flow of the presentation, just kind of get that done, because some of the sections, I know Steve's section has a little more detail. What I want to do is just kind of get through those, and then we'll ask. So yeah, if you have any questions, just make a note, and we can during those times we'll address them then.
Thank you.
So just to start off, the parking and transportation planning goals. Like I said before, these are the fundamental goals that we have set up to start the report. You've heard them before: standardization, accessibility, compliance, communications. So when we start going through these recommendations, they're all going to fall back on meeting these 5 goals. We're going to do just a quick overview of community engagement. And you can see here it was heavy on the engagement. That was a critical part of the report and this project, really focusing on the day-to-day, the community. You guys live here, you work here, you experience these things. So for us to come in and to know some of these hot spots and pinch points areas was tremendous in kind of forming and shaping these policies. We've had, even with help with the village and BART with the online questionnaire, was over 85 comments we received. And that was just online. So that doesn't include the comments that we heard from the town halls. It doesn't include the meetings we've had with the village staff. So it was an effort all around with the village and the community.
It was definitely a great response from the Shorewood public and residents, and that definitely helped shape some of those goals that Bobby led us off with. We always kind of kept coming back to those and thinking about those, because ultimately it's shaped by the public of the village, and we wanted to keep remembering that and thinking of that as we went through some of our recommendations and policy recommendations.
Yeah, and you could tell, you've probably seen this word cloud before, but because of the engagement that we had, you start to kind of identify these themes throughout the whole process. And a lot of them, the big ones: pedestrian safety, compliance, overnight parking, communication. And when you start reading through the report and understanding these recommendations, you can see that they address these key themes that we've had throughout the project. Now we're just going to jump into the parking analysis.
Bobby? So like Bart said, we will be focusing on most of our recommendations in today's meeting, but we do definitely want to do a quick summary of some of our findings from the course of the project over the last 9 months. Here's a map of the study area, which was the entire village of Shorewood. We also collected on-street parking data and off-street data, mainly in the core business districts, so Oakland and Capitol, and the 2 blocks on either side of those streets. And then we looked at most of the public off-street lots too, which totaled to 15 surface lots. We should note that is publicly available lots. So if it's reserved for customers only, if it's signed for customers only, we didn't include those in that count. It was just open to the public, largely Village of Shorewood lots. There's almost 2,500 on-street spaces within that data collection area, and then about 910 off-street spaces. That also includes the 2 publicly accessible garages, which was the Metro Market garage and then the Bartlett Avenue garage. But of course, we considered the whole village, the entirety of the village, when shaping our recommendations and policies.
You didn't consider Wilson Drive in those numbers?
What drive, sorry?
Wilson Drive, that's just our main thoroughfare.
For the data collect, we considered it for policies, but in terms of counting spaces, we just went about a block up on Wilson. We didn't count all of Wilson. So that was the parking inventory, the count of actual spaces, and then we also counted cars. We did occupancy counts at 2 p.m., 7 p.m., and 11 p.m. on a typical weekday. And as you can see in the lower left there is a fair amount of availability. There's a lot of open space out there. The peak time was that 2 p.m. count with 33% occupied. So that was the peak demand time throughout the course of the day here in Shorewood. That means 33% of the available parking supply was parked. Now that does not include areas that are signed as no parking. We only counted available spaces. And again, it was that peak demand of 33%. And then you can see in the chart the breakdown between on-street and off-street. Generally it followed, it makes sense as it gets less occupied as the day goes on. A peak of 28% on-street occupancy also at 2 p.m. and 48% was the peak off-street occupancy at 7 p.m.
And this is Oakland Avenue?
This is Oakland, Capitol, and then the 2 blocks off both streets on both sides.
Yeah, even in residential areas, yeah. And the key that to the right up there, and you read through the report, you see these occupancy maps. You can kind of see the occupancy percentages based on those colors. So it's definitely here visual.
Yeah, so a lot more detail in the report with the heat maps that show this data collection area and where some of those hotspots are. And there are certainly hotspots in these areas. Largely the first block going north on Oakland, just north of Capitol, was often fairly full. Also up north by Kensington, almost into Whitefish Bay, had higher parking occupancy. So there are definitely blocks that had, even right out front, not so much later in the day, but during the midday out front here on Capitol is a little more parked up. So there are going to be blocks that are full or are near full. But when you look at the entirety of that data collection area, that was our observed parking occupancy. And that's not atypical. You'll see that in all commercial districts. You'll see hotspots. Obviously, it might be a big business, restaurant, so that's definitely not atypical. But even looking at the length of Oakland, there's availability every few blocks, and same on Capitol, even more so on Capitol. All right, and so between the data we collected in the field and some of that community engagement that Bobby talked about, which was a definitely important part of this process, and we wanted to prioritize that and needed to prioritize that for this project. We then began to develop our recommendations and our findings. So we're going to present the top, or the first 5 that we think are probably highest priority for implementation. Again, the board will make their decision, but we just wanted to present a little bit of an order of what we think could be prioritized. And then we have the remainder of our recommendations will come after that, and in no particular order, but we'll start with our primary top 5. The first one is looking at village parking utilization. And like I mentioned, overall there is quite a bit of availability for parking, particularly on street. So again, like I said earlier, there might be some hot spots or pinch points on a certain block, but overall there is room and availability for on-street parking, and that'll speak to a little bit some of our recommendations here in a minute. Also, we think there could be better utilization of the Metro Market Garage for overnight parking. We understand there are some concerns with that. It's dimly lit in places, and there's not always the greatest perception of parking in garages, obviously, for potential safety reasons, or it might not be as proximate as parking right in front of the business you're trying to go to. But we think there is some opportunity there. Expanded shared use parking agreements, which the village is already doing a bit with some businesses right there on Oakland. TCF Bank is an example. But we think there's opportunity for more of that to open up a little bit more off-street parking in the core commercial areas particularly. And then we don't often do a late night count like we did at the 11 p.m. count. We were walking and driving around late at night. But we wanted to do that because we looked a lot at resident parking in the residential areas with this study. And we noticed that there was a lot of availability on the residential streets, particularly overnight. So that led us to believe that there is an opportunity to go to number 2 for a resident overnight parking permit. And this would be available for any resident of the village of Shorewood. We'd modify the current overnight parking permit program to allow participation from all village residents. And this would be a purchase. This would be a block permit. And we recommend that would be priced higher than an off-street permit. Generally, on-street parking is more of a premier experience. It's a higher level of service because often you can park right in front of the business you're trying to go to, or in this case it would be your house or apartment, as opposed to an off-street permit. Often you have to park in a lot like folks are doing now and then walk several blocks.
And then get kicked out at 7 a.m.
Right,
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's not a high level of service, so generally those are going to be priced lower than the potential on-street parking permit. And so this would allow residents to park and not have to move that car between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. We should note, of course, that again, this would only be available in currently available parking spaces. So areas marked as no parking, it wouldn't be open there, or any 15-minute loading zones. This would be only in currently available parking spaces. We also recommend no more than 1 permit per license plate, and then a maximum of 2 permits per household. And then it's going to be subject to alternate side and wintertime parking regulations, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Is it an apartment or household?
Yes.
The way we see
Apartment
it.
unit.
Yep.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, but this limits the way that we have it, 2 permits per household. So if 5 people are living in a house, you still only get 2.
What if you have a 20 unit apartment?
Yeah, each
Each
unit,
unit.
yeah, each
Yep.
unit's gonna get it.
And we see it, we're already seeing it now, some of the residential streets, especially closest to Oakland, do see higher parking occupancy. A lot of them are parked up. But we believe that there is the availability throughout the village to open that up to people who want it. We believe not everybody is going to choose to get it. It is a choice people will make. Some people may maintain and stay with off-street parking permits, and there'll be a price involved, obviously. So we don't believe everybody is gonna buy, and we don't believe it's going to be totally parked up everywhere. Cars parked on every block, every part of every block throughout the village.
Yeah,
Again,
options.
right, it's just another option. But
We'll talk about that at the end, right?
Oh, yeah.
Unless you just have a clarifying question.
Yeah, no, we will, absolutely.
we also recommend alternate side overnight parking. We put together this little graphic to try and explain it. So this would be enforced from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. during the week, so Sunday nights through Thursday nights, not including Saturday nights. And basically on Monday and Wednesday evenings, you would park on the odd side of the street, so whatever home addresses are odd, you park on that side of the street, and would have to be there parked before 10 p.m. And then vice versa on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights, park on the even side of the street.
Why? Why? Just give us your reason.
It allows for street cleaning, possible with plowing in the winter and street sweeping in the summer. There's an option there. Safety. Right now, these village ordinance with we don't want long-term vehicle storage of more than 24 hours. So maintaining that, and I'll talk about that in a minute with more details.
Does the alternate kick in at 10 or when's?
You have to
I mean, you
get
got
my-
your car and you don't go out there till 11. Is it like?
Yes, you can get it.
If you have
You have to
to
Like 3:30?
be moved by 10, and then if you're coming back after 10, you would you'd park on that side of the street. So as long as, if it's before 10, you can park on either side, but after 10, you have to be on that side of
Trustee Harper.
that side of the street.
And this is, you mentioned for plowing, so there are parking restrictions, winter parking restrictions, so this would be instead of?
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay,
Um,
because, I mean, and maybe you'll talk about this more, but there are times where there is not snow in December, and there's snow into, almost May. So
We're not there yet.
that, but I mean, I guess maybe you'll talk more about how the alternate sides will.
Yeah, I can cover that now. Basically, so right now it is from December 1 to March 1, the wintertime parking.
Is that for the alternate, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, but the alternate side parking wouldn't be in effect on those streets because right now it is marked as wintertime parking. So you would just park on the other side, the opposite side where it's not signed. You would still have to move your car on that side, so we cover that long-term vehicle storage.
Just for clarification, you would recommend keeping both
Yes.
December to March and then?
Right,
Just
correct,
clarifying questions, Trustee Ward, did you have
Well,
that?
I'll say this to Leanne, but I was going to
Yeah.
ask about, you can see how the level of confusion right here, so I'm going to ask when we get to that point,
Yeah.
how other municipalities have communicated and implemented this, because just even amongst this room, it's tough to.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you. Discussion points, okay.
And then, so that was the graphic on the left. The graphic on the right, there are a lot of streets in the village where parking is not permitted on one side of the street. So again, the alternate side parking wouldn't be in effect on that street. It would you would park on the one side that's not signed as no parking.
Why? What's the purpose of not parking on one side, just because it's a small road?
Yes,
Yeah.
So
correct.
why wouldn't you just alternate? I'm just asking a clarifying question of why you decided that.
Yeah, I think part of the thinking was with the signage currently in place, just maintaining that on that side. But
But that's your recommendation.
Right, maintaining on the opposite side that's not time parking.
And keep in mind that the village ordinance is still moving your vehicle every 24 hours, just for preventing long-term storage, so.
And we can certainly go back to that during our questions. Number 4 was parking enforcement. We do recommend continuing to use the LPR system that the police department is currently using. It's a great system for enforcement. There are a lot of capabilities with that. By the way, LPR is license plate recognition. So this is an enforcement tool that a lot of municipalities use to look at permits for time limits, for time-limited parking.
Is that Duncan?
Yes.
So you're not endorsing, are you, just to be clear, are you endorsing Duncan, that it's a good program, or are you endorsing that type of program?
The technology, we're not endorsing any specific software.
That's important for me.
Yeah, we're just endorsing.
We think it's a great software to have, any type of software in LPR enforcement, but right, not a specific type. Right, yeah. So that would continue to operate within the police department. And then we do recommend considering adding 1 part-time employee to support the enforcement efforts, particularly along Oakland Capitol and near the schools. This could also potentially happen in overnight hours too, as enforcement will probably need to increase a little bit because there would be on-street permanent parking overnight. Another thing to consider is a village ambassador program. This has been highly successful in a lot of municipalities around the country. I will say it's generally in the larger municipalities, but it's not something that Shorewood can't consider. Basically, that is a position or several positions. It's a city position or town position where an employee basically acts as kind of a welcoming ambassador. And that does include parking enforcement, but a lot of times that person is also, instead of just handing out tickets, a lot of times there's a first-time warning involved with that. So instead of going to a town or coming to Shorewood, and as soon as you get here, maybe you overextend the time limit and boom, you get a parking ticket. Well, the ambassador program is a little bit more welcoming, a little bit kind of eases you in instead of boom, getting hit with a ticket. It could be a warning, welcome to Shorewood, or and just want to let you know that this was you exceeded your time here, but instead of boom, getting hit with that ticket, which leaves a bad impression in people's minds, obviously, that's a little bit more welcoming.
Really, because we give out $500,000 worth of tickets a year. You know that, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times, or they also have several other positions. A lot of times they man town festivals or booths answering questions about the town for visitors, but residents too who are looking for events to go to, kind of calendar events, and they're also, basically they're working the streetscape.
The bid does that in downtown Milwaukee, and I've been asking the bid to do that here in Shorewood. That's the ambassador program.
And it
Same
doesn't,
program.
just like you said, you could be in a business commercial district area.
Right.
Specifically for
They do,
it.
yeah, they do it for all of
But-
downtown.
Yeah, planners, benches, and making sure things are clean, sweep. Yeah.
Vandalism,
Right.
trash on the beach.
And then number 5 would be our accessible parking recommendation. We did get a lot of questions on this, so we did definitely want to prioritize this one. And we wanted to make this a proactive system. Instead of always just reactive, we did want to make a little bit of a structure to it. And we recommend that go through initially through customer service, and then on the final back end, when things are finally being implemented with signs and actually spaces being installed, that would go through Public Works. So customer service would perform an initial review for eligibility. Right now, generally across the country, it's recommended that there be 1 accessible space for every 25 regular spaces. So we use that same ratio here in Shorewood, which largely equates to, we recommend up to 1 space per block. We don't recommend installing 1 space on every block, but by being proactive, we want to make that available to the village if somebody requests it, to have 1 accessible space per block as an availability. If that spot is full, they would have to then move to the next accessible spot if needed on the next block.
Does that include temporary, just for clarification, because I know that's the village manager's big question, because we get, say someone has surgery, and they need a temporary, they come in and they say they need a temporary, and right now it resides in the village manager's decision.
Mhm.
So now DPW would be stuck with that. So now what are you guiding them to do?
Yeah, that would not include temporary.
That's the big problem,
Yeah,
or the
okay.
question.
Okay.
Yeah, and also to add to Andrew's point, this is, so say there's any type of redevelopment on the street where they have to, add sidewalk or any type of improvements, that doesn't apply there because you're already required to do that. So this is just for streets and residential streets that
Well,
are
actually not,
existing.
only if it's 25 spaces, more than 25, so you're not
Right,
necessarily required.
right.
And we have other recommendations within the report for actually installing these. A lot of times we recommend them being near driveways, so wheelchairs don't have to deal with the curb and things of that nature. But we definitely wanted to make sure to include it because we know there's been a lot of questions on that.
And did you look at the schools? Because school president wanted to make sure that I asked you that. Did you?
Yeah, we actually have a whole section.
On the Lake Bluff?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. They were, the superintendent actually, the president, or the principal of the high school was at most of our meetings, and the superintendent was at one, and we spoke with them at length about that.
Because it's more so for the elementary.
Yes, Lake Bluff, yep. And now I'll turn it back over to Bobby for our additional recommendations.
Yeah, so Andrew, like I mentioned, those are the kind of top 5 priorities, and you'll see that in the report. We're just going to touch on some of the additional recommendations. We read through the report, there's a lot more detail that's involved with these recommendations up here, but we'll just go through them. The update parking ordinance. So right now, there's an inconsistency with the posted signs, what they say in the ordinance, and even block to block.
And even ordinance to ordinance.
Yes.
They
So.
conflict.
And then the village website on top of that too.
Yeah, and the policies conflict with the ordinances, yes, I
Yes,
understand.
so that is, that's definitely an additional recommendation, to really just keep things consistent, and really that's gonna help communication, which was one of the primary 5 goals that we had set out for. Another additional recommendation is consolidate on-street daytime time limits. So currently there's 10-minute, 15-minute, 1 hour, 2 hour. So our recommendation is basically keeping it 15-minute and then 2 hour. Because you start shifting around in different blocks, keeping it consistent, simplification throughout the whole village.
And did you look into, just to make that recommendation, did you look into why, the history of why we have 2 hour or 1 hour? That was always my question.
So from what we have heard, it was basically based off of business owners. Like they had, I think for the hour, they had an hour because of the turnover.
So they requested it?
They did.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, I'm a business, I requested that it be taken away to 10 minutes.
Right.
And they did it, so.
Yeah.
So that's what you found, okay.
And through the other municipalities and through our research, having the 10 to 15, it's kind of mentally in the behavior it's the same. So why make it complicated and just stick it to one.
Cheaper to make the signs.
Right, yeah, a lot of municipalities just implement village-wide or town-wide 2 hour signage. That's a big thing. It's, like Bobby was saying, it's easy, simple to remember. And behaviors ultimately, we've noticed, don't change a whole ton. People generally are going to go do what they need to do at their business or businesses if they're going to a couple on a commercial block and then move on.
Last question, clarification. There's residential districts, there's like a congestion, we're not the one by that one you're not changing, you can recommend, but the ones that are smaller and they're throughout the village, some of them are like 8 to 10, they differ in time frames, and I never understood why.
Yeah,
Even up by like the elementary school, I think there's one there.
they're all 2 hour, but right, their start
But
and
they're
end
like 8
times
to
all
10 or
vary.
like 9, yeah.
Yeah, we
So-
did recommend maintaining those. I guess it could be looked at to consider making them all consistent, again, for simplicity's sake.
That'd be great.
But, I would imagine it was from neighborhood request originally for the town.
So yeah, just like I said, maintain resident daytime parking permit program. The other one is consider adopting transportation demand management guidelines within the code. And then also adopting complete streets guidelines, which Steve will talk about transportation, which is basically forming different modes, transportation modes. And then the last one for additional recommendations was installing village-wide informational parking signage. So right now, you have a lot of signs that talk about restrictions, but you don't have a lot of signs telling you where to park. So coming into the village, there's not a lot of signs directing where to. There's not any signs, saying, parking here, throughout any of the garages that you have.
So the downtown bid in Milwaukee example, does the Ps. They took a long time to figure out what signage, and then they paid for that and implemented that with
Right, and then
the
there,
management company.
and Shorewood actually has some Ps, but you can't see them.
Yeah.
So you start driving and and then you see the parking sign, but you're already past where you're supposed to go. So,
It's kind of twofold. First, informational for people coming into the village. Residents probably largely know, especially on their block, what restrictions are, but especially for visitors, what parking restrictions are. So this would be at the entrance of primary and secondary arterials, so a lot of those main streets within Shorewood, and Steve will talk a little bit more about that. And then also for wayfinding and guidance purposes, actually guiding you to where there is available parking supply. Especially the Bartlett Avenue garage, it is set back a little bit off of both Oakland and Capitol. So improving the signage there to try and get more folks to park in the garage if possible.
Did you count how many free spots in Metro and Lighthouse are open? I think that'll change your recommendation. The reason people aren't parking is because to buy a
It's all
permit, it's
permit.
free. No, ours is a permit on the top floor, but the rest is free. Roundy's is free, so why would, if it's open parking? So anyways, I didn't know if you knew that fact.
well, so there's other options that come with kind of this recommendation. It's also improvement of, some of the garages where they have counted spaces. You know how many spaces are available within the garage? That's
But
going
they're
to
not
be,
full. I'm saying the free spots aren't even full.
yeah.
They're not even one.
Full, they're just
Right.
open.
Right. Well, if we directing people to use those spaces would be helpful.
All right, so now we're just going to do board questions and comments just on the parking analysis.
Trustee Carpenter, I'll hold my thing because there are many, as everyone
Okay.
knows. This is my baby, the transportation study. Trustee Carpenter.
So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk through the winter parking restrictions and the alternating sides, and in combination with the parking restrictions from December to March. I think, like Trustee Warren was saying, doing both seems very confusing, even for the people in this room. There was just some initial confusion. And my, gut, and this is just my initial thought, especially with, climate change and season changing, we have these restrictions in December, and we don't have any snow until, the middle of January.
I've
So,
heard that many times.
I guess, what are your thoughts on, just always doing alternating sides and getting rid of this winter restriction?
And I'm just going to build
altogether?
on that, because the intent of the April or March or whatever months you want is the exact same as the intent of alternating. It's to be able to clear snow, right? So why do you need both? If they accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, I think largely we were thinking for the streets that were already signed for winter parking. It was probably largely signed that way for a reason, and we maintained that on those streets. It's not village-wide, it is a lot of streets that have winter
But what's
parking.
the intent? Because we needed to clear snow.
Right.
So if you do the alternate sides, it meets that intent. So why would you do both?
And I also would say, at least in my opinion, it seems like a more equitable system, the alternating sides, where you cut out a whole side, so, for my own side of the street, you can't park for, several months out of the year. If you have an elderly neighbor or, somebody with young children, that is, at least then you have that you could park in front of your house, every other day, and still get, and I would almost say have better opportunity for snow removal, since you're alternating. So, that's my inclination, is to move away from that December to March, or making it specific to when there is a snow event, because if there is no snow.
Right.
We did explore that with village staff, Public Works specifically, and they really didn't like just looking at a specific snow event. So that's why we ultimately thought of the alternate side.
They also they like the alternate side. Let me just explain why. Because when Chris, our past village manager, was when we first started our roundtables, because the snow builds up on one side if you don't alternate, and so you lose parking spaces because it's too,
Starts to freeze.
so you lose parking spaces you can never clear. Trustee Maher and then trustee Wood.
I was just wondering, on some of these streets where it's December and March, is they're narrow. As the snow comes, like out here on Murray, the street it becomes dangerous to go down through the streets.
But to your point earlier, if it is alternate side parking, ultimately that doesn't matter, that's a good point, because it'll just be every other
One
side,
side.
it's not in park. Yep.
How does this, was there once there's night parking, and then people buy daytime parking permits, and they're essentially on the street 24/7, just moving their car. We just invested in a major automated waste pickup system where you gotta get to the bins how does that work? I mean, you got cars parked all along the street essentially.
We do it now.
Well, they're not, once you're able to park overnight, then people tend to buy permits during the day too. And then they'll just, like you got down in Milwaukee, when you drive south through into Milwaukee, the streets are full of cars.
Because there is
We don't
not,
have a daytime parking except in the RCA.
Correct.
Right.
Correct? So are you
Yep.
talking about that specific district? We don't have daytime parking. It's
Well, it'd be down, okay.
It's
Just
not-
that-
it's
it's-
not a quarter
It's a
village.
handful, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no, then it's even more you can park on your street.
alternate sides.
Without a permit all the time.
There is currently no regulation for parking away from a driveway, correct? There's nothing in village code that says,
24 feet.
There is.
Distance-wise, there is.
Yeah.
Distance-wise, yes.
okay. Would that allow availability or movement for the,
Nobody follows it.
yeah.
Really?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would suppose if that were enforced or if it were followed, that would leave some room for trash pickup right at those corners of driveways.
Following up, whenever you talk to customer service, which I spent a lot of time with, and Chris, the village manager, there is a reason that you wouldn't want to recommend giving permits for 100% of those spots. As Trustee Maher is saying in the RCA, as we would say in the business district. Business district I'm more familiar with because you need your customers to park. So if you're giving out nighttime parking, 100% on both sides. So and I'm sure they've shared that with you when you had their interviews. What is your recommendation of percentage to leave open? So say you had 1,000 spots or 200 spots, and right now our customer service is very particular, they have their formula. I wouldn't recommend their formula, but I'm just saying, what is the recommended amount of spaces needed to leave open for trash, for business customers? Are you saying 100% should be issued? If you have 200 spaces, 200 permits should be available
In the overnight hours?
in the overnight hours? Because that's, I think, what your concern is the, day and
Yeah,
night.
leaving
And mine would be,
spaces open.
right. Right now, they do 50%, and I think that's ridiculously low.
Mhm.
But there should be a sweet spot.
Yeah, and I will say that East Capitol and North Oakland are not subject to the overnight parking.
Why? That's where everyone wants to park.
Yeah, that's because
They are now. We give out hardships to park on Oakland.
right, there's areas where you can, because
Oh,
the
the whole
multifamily, yeah. But it's because particularly I know that right now they have the
Oh, God.
existing code that it says that,
If the
so,
apartments are going to be allowed to park, or renters, there's no way that our residents are going to accept all those cars on their own street. Not here. They're going to want them on the commercial districts, and that is exactly why the village set up Oakland, Wilson, Capitol as the hardships.
Right.
So I just want to share that with you.
We can look into a metric though for that overnight parking occupancy. Trustee Maher?
And then trustee one.
Yeah, because one of my concerns, and I had asked about it, is some analysis on South Oakland where Harley's, the large buildings, there's a number of large buildings with lots of units. If we start issuing, and currently they can buy spots on the lot, but if it opens up more, you could have people parking blocks, I've seen in like Chicago, larger where people are assigned blocks. So you don't just flood the neighboring blocks with people coming from the
We
large.
do that now. that we have 3, and it's very confusing, it's very tailored, and the system is
Right,
very
there's like
expensive.
current A's, there's like a list of
But
them.
I understand the reason.
So in the implementation, there'll have to be some analysis on what is the capacity to absorb what you're anticipating new permits will be on the street.
They said there's capacity, but I understand the specific question is on those side streets, on the residential streets, how much of those, right, would spill over? If you're not, Oakland and Capitol, you gotta allow it on Oakland and Capitol.
Yeah,
The whole program goes down. Trustee Moore.
So I'm kind of interested, as we look at this recommendation, I'm interested in change management. And I think this is beyond the ambit of what you do, but I'm curious as to what, this is not incredibly intuitive. And if we were to change, it would be a big change. So I'm wondering what other municipalities have had with the experience of implementing this. I'm wondering if you guys have had any feedback. And I'm also wondering if anybody's implemented this and then ended up rolling it back because of that feedback.
Do not manipulate the district.
Yeah, well, I know that we've actually worked in a lot of municipalities, even the community that I live in, particularly just focusing on, there's some that have the actual numbered date of the calendar, and then,
Yes.
odd, even.
Yes, Milwaukee.
So,
I would say more municipalities, probably slightly more, do it by the date.
Yeah.
We thought intuitively day of the week, most people remember, they know if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
I gotta take my trash out Monday night.
People get into a habit.
I hear it all the
routine.
time. My friends will go, oh, it's Tuesday, you gotta park on that side.
Yeah,
Exactly. We
exactly.
thought day of the week, or date of the month might be a little bit less intuitive.
Yeah. But as far as other municipalities, I know that in Skokie, Illinois, I know Madison, there's a lot of different municipalities, similar size to Shorewood, have implemented the alternating signs specifically for overnight.
I don't personally know any that have rolled it back. Not saying it hasn't happened, but I don't know any offhand.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that, I was just.
It is a fairly common practice.
Okay.
How many did you find that do not allow overnight parking on their by permit? Give me a percentage. 2?
Higher than that.
Yeah,
5?
yeah.
I know, it's a lot.
If I had to,
I know.
I would say 15%, 15 to 20%.
Thank you. I have some questions. Trustee Menta, did you have anything? No. No? Okay. Please, Trustee Carpenter.
Oh, sorry. Regarding the purchasing of on-street parking per household, would that only be applicable to a specific vehicle? Or, so if you have a guest from out of town, was that something that they could then use to park in front of your home for a week or
Right,
whatever?
it's all based on license plate, so I mean, I guess somebody wanted to change the license.
But the report
But-
maintained
But they also are maintaining the temporary visitor passes that didn't have,
20.
to 20, exactly.
And then what
So
you
that
also
would
recommended
stay
something
the
after
same
them.
as we currently have.
Yes.
Correct, we're
20.
maintaining that policy.
And what happens when they run out of 20? You
Right, so-
recommended buying more.
There's an option for it.
There's a problem with that. Yes, Trustee Moore.
So-
Oh, sorry, Trustee Carpenter, you finished.
Well, I mean, I guess, sort of. So would that not be an option where you for your household could have a parking permit that you could have for your household? So if somebody's visiting, or if you have a kid home from college, or, whatever that, option
It'd
may
be more of like a hang tag
Yes.
permit as opposed to tied
Yes,
to the.
I mean, that's something that I've heard from a lot of residents, is that there is that need for, or desire for, to have, the ability to park in front of their home, and it may not be, maybe they have a 2-car garage and but they have, extended family visiting.
Right.
So that's something that I've heard, from residents.
You do see that fairly often, but a lot of times in more of a contained community or district. If it's like a large senior living community somewhere, or a large employment center somewhere, but municipality, it's hard to enforce that. It can be quite expensive. It's not very easy to enforce. We like the LPR enforcement software, so
we
you
did
wouldn't
have
need
hang
to tie
tags.
that to a, sorry?
Just for history, we did have the hang tags, which we could have done, and there was many, many reasons that I read from the past history of Shorewood, of why they went to the license plate on your handheld, the checkers. It made it much more efficient.
Right.
Yes,
Less costly.
efficiency is the.
Especially at the village staff.
Unfortunately, not as convenient, I guess, for the resident.
Mhm.
And that was the whole reason I had the village is so you have you know, there's a standard that you have to set. And so this you're able to, you know, we've seen it multiple times as far as 2 per household, identifying what the household is, and like Andrew was saying, really for enforcement to come around, it makes things a lot easier when they're circling through.
Trustee Board.
So I had a quick question. I noticed that, I went to one of the town halls earlier, and I noticed that for resident on-street overnight parking, I think you made a numerical recommendation as to how much we should charge. And this was more ambiguous in terms of, you know, it just should be more than X.
Actually, report.
Is there any reason you rolled that back, or is it just kind of, we just make it more high level? I'm curious as to if you received feedback on that.
We did recommend $60 for the on-street permit.
Okay.
That would have to be explored by the village. That certainly could be higher, but we understand that permits are already quite expensive and.
What's the lot?
The lot, well, the lot
It's
is,
75 for 24
24
hours. So
hours.
so I thought that was
50.
conflicting for what you just said.
and 50 is for just,
I
not
understand.
24 hours.
So
Right.
it's
We
more
thought that was
expensive.
probably the premier option.
No.
24-hour
But it's
or
more
always
than on-street.
accessible. It is.
Yeah.
It is further.
And one of the recommendations is to identify the permit pricing. You know, that's going to be something that I think is, it's going to possibly.
No problems with that.
Okay.
So the lots, the 2 lots that are 24 hours are completely full, right? With a waiting list. Because
Yep.
that, if you're going to have to park in the lot, which we mandate, because we don't have on-street parking permits, then who can possibly get in after 10 and leave by 7? I mean, you're really putting a hardship on mothers. I mean, school timing, it's just not easy. So that's why our lots that are shared are not full. But some of them are, but there are a lot of spaces open because of the time restrictions. So when you recommended it, just this is my one thing, when you recommended let's share more, our staff hates the shared parking because unless it's going to be 24 hours, it's really more work to keep in the parking utilization district than it is utility, than it is to worth the $300 we get or something ridiculous. Now it does provide, but the private sector can do that. I mean, they're going to get the money anyways. We get a little bit, we get half or something of that permit. But do we really need it for the amount that we have to do? We can encourage it, but I just don't know if you looked at that. And there's nowhere else that we can find a lot for 24 hours unless we build one or buy one.
Right.
Okay, so that was shared parking. I have.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, looking at, because currently, you know, you have the off-street option and you have areas where you can have overnight permit. So the recommendation of allowing overnight parking just creates another option. So it's really going to be.
I'm just talking about the lots.
Yeah, no, and I'm saying like some people might, you know, change from off-street to on-street, or they might go stay in the lot. So it's just basically allowing opportunity for the community to decide, you know, if this is more convenient
Sure,
or this is not.
But you recommended to expand that. That's the only question I was asking. To expand.
I
the
think we were thinking more for daytime commercial parking for that recommendation.
Oh, yeah, we're talking. Yep.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions? Okay, ready? Sorry I didn't communicate these before. Our number one concern at the village, at least for mine and the village manager, is that we make $500,000 in parking tickets. I think that's harassment. Whitefish Bay only makes $149,000, so that's abnormally high for parking enforcement, with only 2 parking enforcements, one at night and one during the day. So we don't need any more parking enforcements. We've already harassed our residents, in my opinion, my sole opinion, not the board's. But we both, the village manager and I, talked about that and said, wait a minute. This has been a big sticking point.